Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of Pod Save Chocolate. My name is Clay Gordon, and I am your host for today's topic, which is the use of AI a good thing? And specifically, Google's Gemini AI, is that a good thing? Does it help us understand what's going on in the transparency reports that are produced by companies like Tony's Chocolonely? Today, that is what it is that I'm going to be talking about. But before we get there, I want to say hello, welcome everybody who's joining me. If you are watching on YouTube or LinkedIn or Facebook, please go into the live chat or to the comments and let me know where in the world you are connected from, and I will get that shout out up on screen. If you have questions or comments about anything I might say during the course of the episode, again, put them in the live chat or the comments, and I will try to answer your questions. And then, as always, this episode of Pod Save Chocolate is sponsored by you, the members of The Chocolate Life. If you're not a member of The Chocolate Life, please go over there today. This is the homepage of The Chocolate Life right now. You can click on a green button if you're not already a member and join. And I produce all this content, and the content is paid for by premium members of The Chocolate Life, and I give it to the world for free. And so if you'd like to support the work that I do, please go to The Chocolate Life and become a premium member for as little as $5 a month. That would really support the work that I do, and I do appreciate it. And I want to do a quick shout out already to Gordon Cummings, who's connecting from Clearfield, Utah. Gordy, welcome to this episode of Pod Save Chocolate. And if you have any particular questions, please let me know, and I will get into them as quickly as possible. Now, for every episode of Pod Save Chocolate, I put together a post. And here is the post for today's episode. Right? And one of the things that I do here is that I put all the links to watch the archive in case you're not watching this live and you do want to watch it in the future. It's available on YouTube and on LinkedIn. It's available for 30 days on Facebook, after which you need to watch it on YouTube or LinkedIn. And then there's a sort of run of show where what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through what it is that I'm going to talk about over the course of the next hour. And if there are things get mentioned during the course of the episode, I will add them to this. So you don't have to follow along and grab URLs or do anything like that during the episode. What you can do is you can always go back and say, oh, here's the page that was being talked about, or here is the website that was being visited. So I want to do that. Right? But this episode is specifically about what can Google's Gemini tell us about Tony's open chain transparency report for the 2023-2024, which is September through August 2023-2024, that reporting series. It was published at the end of February, I believe, of 2025. But what can we learn about the use of AI in helping us understand what the transparency reports are all about it? But before I do that, I want to go back to the report itself and to a page actually in the Open Chain report. It is, I believe this is page 35 of the Open Chain report. And, I'm going to find myself in the corner over here and see if I can make this thing as big as I possibly can. Right. So what I want you to take a look at are a couple of things. So we've got some numbers, right? And this is about the amount of premium paid per metric ton of cocoa to reach the living income reference price. Right? And one of the things that you'll notice that's missing here, well, number one is that the color choices are pretty awful for screen display. The farm gate price is this pink and this pinkish color, and the pink is disappearing into the background, but there's a pink here and a pink here. We're supposed to get the fact that visually this is hard to read, right? And Tony's is so dedicated to its design language that I believe it doesn't care whether or not its reports are readable, they're legible. And it may be a deliberate choice to obfuscate them. I think it's a deliberate choice to obfuscate them, to make them harder to read and to interpret. Right? That's my personal opinion. Right? I don't know for sure, but it's the only interpretation that I can make. But let's go take a look at this and say there are a couple of things. Number one is that We don't know what currency this is denominated in, so it doesn't say what it is. It just says the amount of premium paid. Um, we have three numbers that are here: the farm gate price, the fair trade premium, and the living income premium. And notice that the amount of premium paid, for some reason, includes the farm gate price. So this is not just the amount of premium that is paid here. But we can assume that across the bottom here, there's a baseline at $0. But we know from looking at page 6 of the main report, right, that the amount of living income reference price paid, the LERP, in the Côte d'Ivoire, Ivory Coast, was 2,200 euros per metric ton. It's way over here. And in Ghana, it was 2,005 euros per metric ton. And by the way, this is an update to the original graphic that was produced by the report. The original graphic says this is the amount of the premium that they paid, not the LERP, the given. And Tony's didn't mention that there was a change. So I pointed out that this made no sense. And so they did update it. Right. But so number one is we have to switch contexts. We don't know what this is about. Now, I am sure they're going to say, well, we've been talking about euros and so you should just get it. And that other places in this report, we do talk about 2,200 euros a metric ton and 2,000 euros a metric ton, or 2,005 euros a metric ton. But it's not here. And so what we need to do is we need to do the math in order to figure out what these numbers refer to. So I actually went ahead and updated their graph for them. Right, so I updated their graph. And so the amount of premium paid per metric ton. So what I did was I said, here's the baseline at 0. And then I counted the number of pixels, right, at 2286.74 euros per kilo, and made it, and then I counted down after calculating the number of pixels to say, here's where 2,200 euros a metric ton is going to be, and here's where 2,005 euros a metric ton are going to be. And so we can see that for the main crop in 2023, when the living income reference price in Côte d'Ivoire was 1,372 euros per kilo, for the main crop, the fair trade premium was 563 euros per kilo. And the amount that Tony's paid on top of that, I am assuming this is Tony's paid, the additional premium needed to close the gap. That's interesting language. The additional premium needed to close the gap. It looks like we went above closing the gap, but we didn't reach closing the gap in these two ones. And the farm gate price was so high here that we didn't need to pay anything extra. So this language here is a little disingenuous, or misleading at least, right? But what I've done is I've also indicated that, oh, here's the 2022-23 main crop, mid crop, and here's the 23-24 main crop, mid crop. So I added these dividers to say, we're looking at 2 different years, right? And what can we learn from those 2 different years? Well, number one, right, after the mid crop in 22-23, the living income reference price was raised, and then again for the next crop. But more importantly, what I did is I added these numbers up. So once I have a reference point, this 2,200 reference point, what I can do is I can say that 1,372 plus 563 plus 505 is equal to 2,440 euros, which is above the LERP, right? And that 1,068 euros of the price was premiums paid, right? The total amount of premiums paid represented 43% of the total price paid, and Tony's contribution was 20%. And so I added a lot of context to this particular graphic. And so here, for example, for the mid crop in 2023 in Côte d'Ivoire, what happened is that between the farm gate price and the fair trade premium, Tony's didn't pay anything in terms of the living income reference price premium. They didn't have to pay a premium, which is what makes this over here a little bit disingenuous. And all the claims, for example, here on page 6, the amount of living income reference price paid, right? And then going back. So we need to be really, really careful about how we go about looking at these graphics. And then in addition, they didn't reach the living income reference price for the mid crop and main crop in 2022, 23, and 23, 24. And in the main crop, they hit it exactly. I mean, they hit it exactly at $22,005 a metric ton. They overpaid, right? And they paid a lot of extra premium in the main crop. Now, there's also a management fee which gets paid to the co-ops, and it's not entirely clear. It's not clear enough whether the management fee is included here. I don't think it is, but I think it needs to be a little more clear. So just looking at this particular graphic and then doing the math, right? What it does is it suggests to me that, oh, every other graph which is on the site or in the report needs to be checked in order to be sure that the graph is accurately representing what it claims to be representing. That's a huge undertaking, as you might imagine, but just this one graph, taking a look at its shortcomings, I think is probably a good word to use to describe it, is that calls into question all of the other graphs, which include numbers in the rest of these reports. So I did want to go and talk about that because I think it's really, really important to understand what the limitations of these reports are. And again, I think Tony's is so committed to their design language that they are not really concerned about whether or not they are representing quote unquote things accurately, right? And I believe that this is done deliberately to obfuscate things. I talk about this. There's a quote which is attributed to W.C. Fields, also William Claude Dukenfeld, which is, if you can't baffle them with brilliance, dazzle them with BS. And I think that what we're doing is, to a large extent, we're being baffled with a lot of BS in these reports. So, I mean, it took me a while. I mean, I had to take the image, I had to crop it, I had to bring it into Photoshop, I had to count pixels, I need to do the math, I need to draw all the lines. I made a mistake. I noted that I made a mistake in here because I had the line in the wrong place. I wasn't paying attention, close enough attention. I moved it accidentally. And but this is the kind of work that needs to be done on this transparency, quote unquote, transparency report, open chain report, in order to figure out what they're trying to say and if they're reporting what they're doing transparently, which, again, in my opinion, I don't think they are. All right, so having got through that, what I want to do is I want to go back to the topic for today. And that is, I uploaded the Tony's Open Chain Impact Report for 2023 to Google's Gemini's in the deep research component of the Gemini user interface. I use Google for Gmail. I use it for document sharing. And so I've got a pro subscription to Gemini as a part of my monthly subscription. And so I uploaded the impact report and I asked it the question, what technologies are employed in Tony's Open Chain? And it came back to me after a little while, took about maybe half an hour or so. It came back with me with this report. And this report, which is included on the page for today's episode, I've downloaded it here. So if you want to go download it, it's in docx format. If you want to download it, you can go read it yourself and form your own opinions of what it is that's going on, what it is that Gemini says. So read the report and then read the document. Now, I'm showing it to you this way because there are some sort of semi-interactive features which you won't get from the document, right? Because they're not included. So the first one of which is, you'll see that there is a down arrow here, which it's saying, oh, here's where I got this information. And of course, there's only one source document. Every time there's a down arrow, it's pointing to the same place. Now, unfortunately, there are no page numbers. This doesn't jump to a particular page inside the PDF, and there's no reference here to the page numbers. So I can't actually figure out, even if I get this summary from Gemini, I don't know where in the document this information was pulled from. And I don't know exactly what it's quoting and what it is summarizing and what it is. So what it is summarizing, shortening, or taking content from two or more places and munging them together, or what is its own quote unquote thinking. So right off the bat, right, when I look at this report, I realize that I am relying on Gemini's interpretation of the document in a very limited context. The only context I have provided it is this one document. And I do not believe, or I don't know to the extent that it's going out to the larger LLM, the large language model that it is used to construct its vision of the universe. I don't know what it's doing when it does this. So number one is we need to be aware of context. Number one, when we give it information and we scope, right, where it is that it's going to be, when we scope the information that it's going to be using to generate its a quote unquote its analysis, we need to be careful to understand what is inside the scope, right, and the language model that it uses to be able to develop its quote unquote understanding of what's going on in the report. So this is a number one caveat, right? And the second caveat is that I noticed in reading through it, is that the tone that Gemini writes in its deep research mode is, so I use Grammarly as a spelling checker. So when I get my reports on weekly reports and how I use Grammarly, it says, oh, you speak in an authoritative tone, 40% of the time. And you write in a confident tone, 20% of the time. I recognize that what Gemini is doing is it's writing in an authoritative, confident tone all of the time, right? So what it's trying to do is it's writing in a tone that is intended to persuade you that it knows what it's talking about, or it's in just quote unquote talk. It quote unquote knows what it's talking about. It is writing in a tone of voice which is designed to give the reader confidence that it can trust what's being reported. Okay, and that's a challenge. So for example, I did look to see if there was any equivocation language anywhere, and it used the word suggest 3 times in the entire document. I forget the number of pages, right? But for example, there is a quote, right? The undertaking of a quote unquote remediation effectiveness study and the focus of quote knowledge exchange and sharing learnings, end quote, among cooperatives suggests a data-driven approach to refining the CLRM process in intervention as the system scales. That's not a whole lot of lack of confidence, but it still is giving a whole lot of credence to the document. So when Gemini is writing authoritatively and confidently in terms of its tone, what it's doing is it's giving full credence at face value to all of the information in the document. It takes everything at face value. There is no neural subnet of skepticism. And I think that this is a huge challenge, right? And it may be due to the fact that I scoped this so narrowly. So like, here's just one document, right? But it gives everything that is reported in this, right, full credence at face value. Everything that it says in this report is true and can be trusted, right? And I think this is one of the challenges that artificial general intelligences are going to face in development if we're going to learn to trust them. Is they're going to need to learn how to disambiguate They're going to need to learn to consider the information that they're being given, that they're analyzing skeptically. Right? I don't know how you do that. I would love to talk to somebody who's in the AI field about how we could make an AI, a generative AI like this skeptical, right? But I think it's absolutely necessary, because this review of this one document says we need to be very, very careful about trusting this, because for reasons I will talk to you a little bit later. So let's talk a little bit about confident tone, right? And authoritative tone. So we get it right from the title. So technology driving ethical sourcing in Tony's open chain. I would talk about the word supporting, right? It is the driving factor here, why Tony's is doing this is not because of technology. So technology is not the driving factor here, right? What they're trying to do is they're trying to create a traceability system for their supply chain, and technologies support, right, Tony's open chain ethical sourcing. So number one is that just using the word driving here is really interesting. Just already it says bing, bing, bing. It sets my skepticism radar off the top of my head. Now, you may notice that I've got a couple of things going on when I do this mouse over the word driving, or I highlight it. First one of which is I have the ability to highlight that word if I want to. All right. And the other one is I'm using a browser called Arc. And one of the things that Arc will do for me is that when I highlight something, it will actually go and perform a search request in the background and give me some information about what's going on. And so it is giving me a contextual reply about what the word driving might mean in here. And I believe it is a feature of Arc. I've been using Arc almost exclusively for the last 2 years. I was an early beta tester, so it may be 2 years. And so I don't know how other browsers work these days. I don't know if they do that, but that's what it does. So in case you're wondering what you're seeing while I'm there. So in production, again, just think about the way this is being written. The technological background of ethical sourcing, ethical cocoa sourcing. So what this suggests is that there is something that Tony's is doing with its open chain, right? That is the way that sourcing of cocoa should be done, right? That it is the technological background of ethical cocoa sourcing. And anybody who wants to source cocoa ethically needs to go and have this background, right? Have this backbone. So just be very, very careful as you're going through and looking at the kinds of reports that Mistral and ChatGPT and Gemini and all these others AIs are returning, and think about the tone of the language, right? And think about, does the tool that I'm using actually have enough data in order to be able to be as confident as it says it is, right? Can I trust it? Should I be skeptical? And I'm going to show you some things in a few minutes that are going to suggest that no, you can't trust it, right? It's really, really interesting. It's really, really interesting. So anyway, so so again, I mean, it's going to be really difficult to see here, but if I go click on this learn more, it's always going to show me the one document, but then it's got a footnote here. And so somehow referencing this document gets me to two footnotes in the static version of this that you can download. The footnotes, the numbers 1 and 1 do show up, but this document does not. So there's no page references or anything like that, right? But just be aware, right, that it's not that, at least in contextually, it's not going to tell me where it got this information. So we have some headlines. Overview of Tony OpenChain's mission and the imperative for technological intervention. Okay. It's not a quote, and so it's not presented as a quote. So I will say, okay, so the open chain has established a clear mission to Tony's has established a clear mission, right, to eradicate exploitation with the cocoa industry. The mission of open chain directly confronts. So I would be, again, very, very careful of ascribing motivation, right, to Tony's open chain. So we have the company, and it's not the open chain. Again, this is because of the language that's actually in the document. So we'll go down and we see here the next paragraph. Oh, it's referring to the same document. I've got a couple of footnotes in here. I can't figure, I would need to go read the entire report in order to be able to figure out what pages are being referred to. The only thing I'm going to guess here is that these are in document order, that as I go down here, on a paragraph by paragraph basis, the sources for these are earlier in the document for the first paragraph and later in the document for the second paragraph. That's the only thing I've been able to come up as a possibility. So the pivotal role of technology in enabling transparency, traceability, and impact. So what I'm looking at here is, oh, could I take the headlines for this, right? So the title and the subtitles and the headlines, and use this as an outline for creating my own document. I actually like the idea of the pivotal role of technology enabling transparency, traceability, and impact. The answer is absolutely yes. The only way that we're going to be able to keep track of things is if we put them into a database and make those databases available online. One of the things that they don't talk about is they don't talk about the publication, so the accessibility of the data that are captured, right, in these systems, right? And Tony's does not make this data available. I think other than to one or more of its auditors, PricewaterhouseCoopers would be one of them, and maybe to its mission allies. I don't know the answer to that. I don't know what they share. It's not open to me, right? But this first table is what is interesting to me, right? Because what it says is it actually answers the question: the technology system, the primary function, and the key supporting document references, right? And all of the documents are within the Tony's Open Chain document that I uploaded, the report. But now I have page references. So if I look at a subsystem, which is called the Bean Tracker, it says it found information on 21, 25, and 84. If it talked about GPS polygon mapping, it gives me page references. It talks about a satellite intelligence platform. But what it doesn't do is it doesn't let me know what company is actually providing the satellite intelligence platform. And so I need to go to these pages and find out if it's listed. It talks about the child labor monitoring and remediation system. It talks about a mobile app for it, a farm smart application, which is about enabling farmers to have access to information that's going to make them better farmers, and to understand more about weather patterns. So for example, they won't apply a fertilizer or a fungicide or an insecticide, or other pesticide, right, too soon before a rain event, so it gets washed off. I mean, there are all sorts of things like that. It's important to take a look at. Digital payment systems, that's something that is really, really important. Like, how are we going to pay the farmers? So there's information about it here. And then there's some back process, right? And now what we do is we go through, and there is, right, there is the Bean Tracker. So we're going to be going through each one of the technology systems which are mentioned in the table. We're going to go through them one by one, and we're going to figure out what it is. So we're going to talk about core technologies for supply chain traceability and transparencies. It's actually core technologies for Tony's Open Chain. I don't know. We can argue if every supply chain needs all of these things. So are some of these things part of every supply chain? I don't know the answer. I don't know the answer to that question. But we're talking about Tony's proprietary engine for bean level traceability. Again, one of the things that it doesn't talk about is it doesn't talk about whether or not this data are going to be made available to anybody for taking a look at and auditing. And I can tell you that it's not. But one of the uses of the word suggests is here. So one of the things that they suggest is they're very charitable when they say that the open chain suggests a desire to control. Absolutely, they want to control this. But the other one is they want, by it being proprietary and it being a walled garden, we're going to talk, we're only going to talk about the cocoa that we source for ourselves in our mission outlies. They're going to make it a walled garden and they're not going to make it publicly available. So I think it has as much to do with controlling accessibility to data as it does controlling the platform so that we can have confidence that it's working properly. Again, so this aura of confidence, this aura of authoritativeness in terms of the tone of writing, as well as we're going to take everything at face value as being true, is that even when it appears to equivocate, when it uses words like suggests, what Gemini is doing is it's giving the benefit of the doubt to the topic that it's bringing up. And so I look for words that are suggest equivocation. Suggest is one of them, and I go, is this? Are there other alternative explanations for why Tony's or any other company, right, who's in the report would be something that I would look at? So I mean, at a high level, at again 10,000 meters, 30,000 feet, it's really interesting. It gives me a sensibility for it, but when I deep dive into it, when I go into the specifics of it, there is this, it's just assumption of credibility. There's no skepticism whatsoever. And there's the assumption that things are true. Everything is taken at face value as being true. So when you go and use a tool like Gemini, could be Chat GPT if it offers the same service, it doesn't matter what you're using. What you need to do is you need to cast your own skeptical eye, right? And be a very, very careful reader, right? When it comes to taking a look at, it comes to how you're going to accept and use the analysis that is presented to you. So I've uploaded this document. There's a link to download the open chain report, and you can make this assessment yourself. Right? All right. But for people who are watching, does this make sense? Does it affirm anything you might have thought about the way AIs are currently constructed? Have you had experiences like this yourself in examining what, right, ChatGPT or some other AI has delivered as the result of a prompt? You've asked it a question and you've got something back and you go, I wonder if I can trust this. Right? There is a tendency to do that, and because we think of AIs as being smarter than ourselves. Right? And I, again, would suggest that part of being smart is being skeptical, right? And not accepting things at face value and not accepting things that are true, right? Just because the document writes or does with the document, just because the AI presents them as being authoritative. Now there is chats aren't used to improve the model. Gemini can make mistakes, so double check it. So there is this disclaimer, right, at the bottom, right? We make mistakes, right? There is that disclaimer at the bottom, but assume that that almost everything that is reported is a mistake, and go back and use the language use what is written as a key, as a map, if you will, to where you need to go back into the source document and understand what the source document is actually telling you. Right? It is not a substitute for doing your reading of the actual source document. And here's why. Right? So I asked Gemini to write an interactive report, generate an interactive report. And here it is. Here is the interactive report that was generated. Now, I can get the HTML code for this. And so what I'm going to do is, after the episode, I'm going to experiment with embedding this interactive report on the post for today's episode. So you should be able to do this on the post on this page when I get done. I'm on this page when I get done. I'm hoping that I will be able to do that, that it's not so huge that it will have a real impact on the display of the page, but I'm going to go and do that. So here's what I want to talk about. So number one, it says that, right, so it has said that ending exploitation in cocoa is the most important thing to take away from this open chain report. It's, as I pointed out the last time I did one of these things, ending exploitation in cocoa is different from 100% slavery-free chocolate. I am curious. So if there's anybody at Tony's, whether in the U.S., UK, Ireland, at home office in the Netherlands, talk to me about the evolution of 100% slavery-free to ending 100% slavery-free chocolate to ending exploitation in cocoa. In one respect, I think this is an expansion of the mission, ending exploitation in cocoa. On the other hand, it's not nearly as understandable. 100% slavery-free chocolate is much more understandable. It's much more forceful. There's a lot of more emotional connection to that phrase. Let's just step that. So let's talk about it. So what this report has done is what this tool has done is it's gone through the report and it said that there were 23,285 metric tons of cocoa beans sourced. And the report says that there were 17,690 metric tons of cocoa beans sourced. And I'm going, what? Right? So this page is in the entire Tony's Chocolonely report, right? Not just the open chain report. But what we've discovered is that there is a mismatch, that somehow the engine, the same engine that has generated the text that we were looking at, has generated this overview, and the numbers are different. Now, 2,447 farmers engaged. 2,400. That's I don't know where that number is because it's different from these two, right? And 17.7 million in total premiums paid. Right? We don't actually have a number here that says total in premiums paid, so it's not reported. So it's come up with some numbers that are not a part of that do not appear to be part of the report. And we don't have and there are no indications here about where those numbers came from. So let's go through. They talk about what the sourcing principles are. Oh, traceable cocoa, higher prices. So it's done a good job of this. It's editorialized by putting emojis, emoticons in front of things, right? And it talks about each one of the goals and how they go about doing it. Their impact dashboard. So this image here, this chart here, is the same as this chart here for, I'm sorry, let's get back to this. So this is the same as this chart here. We've got the farm gate price for Cote d'Ivoire, just Cote d'Ivoire. But what do we have here? We have a baseline of 0. We have dollars per metric ton, right? We have the sources for farm gate price, fair trade premium, the living income premium, right? But what we don't have is we've got a stack. So we start off with the market price plus some premium. We don't know what that premium is. We have the fair trade price plus so this is market price plus the premium. This is the market price plus the fair trade price plus the premium, right? And then we have the farm gate price, right? Now it says that the living income reference price that Tony has paid is $852 a metric ton, right? The cooperative fee is on top of it. But $852 a metric ton, can we go find that here? So on no place do we find anywhere that Tony's is paid $852 per metric ton as a fee. So I don't know where, I'm sorry, I don't know where um, the Gemini found these numbers, right? But I do like the fact that they tried to present them in a way that's a little bit more straightforward. And this is live. Difficult to do in a PDF, but this is live. And so we can use the magic of HTML coding, um, and we can actually put an explanation up there. We can do a mouse over and format it. And so we can give us some detail. So we have the exact numbers. So the farm gate price was, let's take a look. Farm gate price for 2023, 2024 in Cote d'Ivoire was $1,424 a metric ton. We can go over here and 2020, we don't find 1,424, although we do find 1,524 a metric ton. And so it says main crop, mid crop. We need to look at these things very closely. If what it is you decided to take this on face value, right, you would not know, or you would not be getting the correct answers, right? So this is a clue, right? That number one is that we have a long form explanation, which is telling them stuff. We have this interactive presentation, which is telling some stuff, right? It's the same engine, I think, which is used to extract this information from the document. And they're telling you things which appear to be different from the document. And they're not at any point here giving you, oh, go to this page and find out this is where we got the information from. So there's no easy way. You have to go through and work very, very hard. Right? So we can go through this poverty reduction multidimensional poverty index. I would really like to know where it found all the data. There are pages that talk about the multidimensional poverty index. I don't know that these data are presented on those pages. But what we do is when it comes to poverty, it looks like access to cooking fuel, highlighting challenges, is the number one issue when it comes to living standards in both Cote d'Ivoire and Ghana. And one of the things I know about the way fair trade premiums are used, and I believe that the living income reference premiums are being produced. So is that um, you have to be very careful to understand where it's pulling these numbers from. And when it comes to the use of premiums, Tony's can't and fair trade don't dictate how those premiums are used, right? And the living income reference price is an individual farmer, but they're being paid through cooperatives, and so there's no coordinated program as a part of this to address the key aspects of the multidimensional poverty index or any other index, which we fall short. So it's hard to understand what to go about doing this, and again, where it came up with the numbers, because it's not actually telling us where we came up with the numbers. And so if you want to, go look through the open chain report and find out where they are, where these numbers are in the report. I didn't see them, but you may find them, and didn't find them in this level of detail. So Mark, who's watching, says, Clay, I have found that these language models are not very good with numbers, and even worse with numbers and photos. Absolutely. Absolutely. And this is one of the points that I want to address. Again, because of the tone, the authoritative and confident tone that this information is presented in, there and an unearned trust in the fact that, oh, these guys are smarter than we are. These guys, these language models, these tools are smart and they know what they're doing, right? That we can trust what they're doing, right? And I agree with you. They're bad at this, right? But, right, as we move towards an era of what's called artificial general intelligence, and this are things that Musk and so Elon, Dario Amodei, who is one of the and the people who are at the head of Facebook, Zuckerberg, the founders of OpenAI, the people who are doing at ChatGPT, the people who are doing these things, they're all saying that within the next couple of years, these things are going to be so good, right, that we're going to be able to trust them. And again, until there is a subnet in these models that is devoted to skepticism, right, I don't think that they can be trusted anytime soon. And this is how I would go check. This is how I would go check them. I'm somewhat of a subject matter expert, not just in cocoa and chocolate, but I've been deconstructing transparency reports for at least 5 years now, maybe since 2018. So more like 7 years now. I've been doing this. And so I am skeptical about this, and you should be too. And this is what the purpose of this exercise is. You should be skeptical. Another place that I want to go is this sourcing volumes by partner 2023 2024 is really, really interesting, because I did the math, and you'll see that there's a mouse over here that lets us know, right, how much cocoa was sourced. And I look at this and I find that Ben and Jerry's, which is part of Unilever, sourced 7,500 metric tons through Open Chain, and Albert Heijn. So Ben and Jerry's is an ice cream company. Albert Heijn is a grocery store. Aldi's is a grocery store. I don't know JDE Pete's. I don't know Plus. Chuck. Delicata is mentioned nowhere in the report. The name Delicata doesn't appear. If I were to go to the Open Chain report, which is here, right, and search for the word, I need to do the mouse over here. Let me get rid of that. Prompt, and search for the word delicata, Delica. The word delicata doesn't appear in this report. And so I wonder, how the heck, right, do we see the word delicata show up here, right? But I can tell you, at no place in the entire report do these numbers exist. It didn't pull these out of the report. They don't exist in the Tony's Open Chain report. They don't exist in the larger annual fair report. These numbers aren't there. It did not indicate where it got these numbers. Gemini didn't say, this is where we got the numbers. There's no way to know. But I did the math, and guess what? The math tells us that, these companies sourced 23,275 metric tons of cocoa. Just these companies in 2023, right, as part of Open Chain 23, there is no indication anywhere that, this includes the, let's go here, this 17,690 metric tons sourced. So was the total 17,690 for Tony's and all of its mission allies? Was the total for just the mission allies 23,275? And there's a 23,285 somewhere else in the Open Chain report. So off by 10, that's off by 10 is an easy thing to do. But is it 17,690 just for everybody? Is it 2,375 for the mission allies? Is the total 40,000 metric tons? And the answer appears to be it was 17,000 metric tons, with a goal of 30,000 metric tons this year and 80,000 metric tons in future years. So we're looking at these numbers, right? And we're going, here are companies that aren't mentioned, right? And they're not mentioned when we go to the list of companies. I don't know who Delicata is in terms of mission allies. They don't show up anywhere else in the report. And the numbers are just wrong. The numbers are wrong. And I don't know how to go about squaring. And this is the point, right? I don't know how to go about squaring what it is that the is reported here in the Open Chain report I don't know how to square what's going on there with what's going on in the rest of the report. So it's really, really challenging. But let's take a couple. I don't want this to. People say, "Hey, Clay, how come you're ragging on Tony's?" Right? And I'm not ragging on. I am using Tony's as an example, right, of how we can go about being skeptical consumers of the information that shows up in these reports. Right? That's it. Right? Tony's produces the reports. Right? They are long. Right? They have lots of information in them. And the challenge becomes, how do we go about deconstructing what it is that they present and find out if they're internally consistent, right? And often they're not internally consistent. Often the numbers that they present don't make sense. And so that's why I'm doing it. What I will do is I will link in the post afterwards, after I put the HTML for the interactive report. What I'll do is I'll link to another post where I look at the uncommon cacao report, one or more of them, reports from Taza, and also reports from Dandelion. And you can see that, this is something that I've been doing for quite some time. But let's go take a look at this. I do want to give a shout out. This is a really interesting page of the report. It's page 15 of 86 of the Tony's Open Chain report. And they talk about cocoa market prices and cocoa farm gate prices, and they talk about some of the ways that these two are connected. And this is actually one of the better, clearer descriptions of this phenomenon. Now, they've got all this weird stuff that doesn't provide any value. It's just visual fluff. I mean, my recommendation to all of the designers who are a part of this project, go read Edward Tufte's The Visual Display of Quantitative Information and think about applying principles in VDQI to your design vocabulary. You should be focusing on making this stuff readable, legible, right? Consistent, not making it pretty, right? Because this green line, does it? See, the green line, it turns to yellow to the next page. This green line, it ends here. There's no connection. Like they're not even internally consistent in the way they use their design language, right? But they should, right? So it's frustrating to me that on the same page they can do, oh, this is really an interesting expression of what's going on. So if you want to look about market prices and farm gate prices, this is a pretty good explanation. I disagree when they are saying that they are inherently connected, right? And in the ways that they suggest, right? So there is an artificial connection between the farm gate price and a monopsony, which is Cote d'Ivoire and Ghana, where the government sets the prices, right? And an open market like Nigeria right next door, when the government is not setting prices. And there's the only reason why their description works is because they're working in two countries where the market price is dictated by the government. And this model makes sense, right? Given that context. Now, I want to let you know that I did look at this. There are some numbers, right, in this page, right? And these numbers are the same numbers that are on this graphic. Yay, there is some internal consistency, right? Which is a really, 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 really good thing, I think, that we've got the same things. But this particular browser doesn't let me go back and forth easily between the embedded document, right? It's a challenge because of the way the data are available to me online, right? But these numbers that are here represent the numbers that are in the other graph. So that's cool. I'm really, really happy that they do that. Although I'm not entirely sure why they add numbers for the 2021, 2022 main and mid crops when this is about the 2022, 23, 24 mid crop. I'm not entirely sure. They're giving us more information. Yay, more information is good, but sometimes more information is just overwhelming, right? And this is a particular case where that happens. But if you do go check between the data on this page, page 15, and the data on the other page, which is page 35, what you'll do is you'll find the numbers are the same, which is a good thing. Now, there are some other things that I do want to point out about the report, not necessarily about the way Gemini is talking about this, but they are related. So the first one of which is it says the living income story. So again, one of the things that's missing here is we don't know what the living income reference price is. So we have a couple of indicators right here, but we don't know how living income reference price fits into this. And so we need to go understand, we need to have remembered what these prices are, which is not unreasonable to some extent, but these numbers are presented not to scale out of context, which makes a challenge. But notice that this, like, I don't know what potential household income is, but it says, even after Tony says all this stuff about paying the living income reference price, right? It says we pay the living income reference price, 2,200 metric ton in Cote d'Ivoire, 2005 in Ghana, right? It says that only 19% of cocoa farmers at the long-term partner cooperatives are earning at or above the living income benchmark. I'm trying to reconcile that with everything else they're saying about paying the living income reference price. Again, anybody at Tony's want to tell me how this squares with everything else you're saying about paying the living income reference price? I would really, really like to know. I'd like to know if PwC is auditing your report, right? Not the financial statement. I'd like to know if anybody with an accounting background, anybody is auditing the numbers in these reports, right? There's somebody who's combing through them and saying, well, you put this in this report and it doesn't make sense. 80.9% of cocoa farmers are not yet crossing the living income benchmark. My gosh, right? How does that square with, how does that square with the other things that they're talking about? I'm sorry, I can't tab back and forth between applications here. It's another tab. I don't necessarily want to leave this. But this is why you have to read very, very closely. There's a lot of data here. It's a pretty graphic. They have some icons. They talk about all this kind of stuff. But look at the numbers, right? They talk about what net farmer income is, right? So look at what they're understanding. Net farmer income, other income, right? So look at these closely. Understand what it is they're saying. Trying to go, oh my gosh, right? Over 80% of the farmers are not earning the living income who are in this program. That's a really strong, I think, indication that there's something to the story that we're not being told, or these numbers are just being misrepresented, right? And I don't know which is which. So this is global cocoa bean production from 21 to 2023 by country in 1,000 metric tons. So we do have a scale here. Right. They do put the numbers here, which is really interesting. For me, I think this is the wrong way to organize this, right? I don't want this organized by year. I want to organize this by country. So I want each country to be in a solid color. And then what I want is each of these to represent. So we'd have Cote d'Ivoire in 2021, this bar would be right next to it. This bar would be organized by country. And now we'd be able to get some interesting trend lines that are hidden here because of the imbalance of the scale. So we're looking at this, you're looking at this, and we have Cote d'Ivoire is more than twice as much as everybody else is. And so it's really difficult to discriminate, right? The little tiny differences that are in here. By reorganizing this and organizing it by country and not by year, it would be a easier to code and more usable graphics. So Mark is asking a question. What incentives do these farmers have that are not getting a living income? That's an extremely good question. Right? And so one of the things about the way Tony's works is that only sources from Fair Trade and or Rainforest Alliance certified cooperatives, right? And so If I am a farmer and I am a member of a cooperative that is certified, I my cooperative collects the certification fee on my behalf. Now, there's no guarantee that the cooperative is paying the farmer 100% of that. So maybe, right, if I'm a part of this, I get paid more, right? But that's the whole thing. I'm looking at what Tony's is saying. We're paying the living income reference price, but 80% of our farmers are not earning the living income reference price. I don't know how to reconcile those two. The goal for the farmer is to earn more money. But this is an issue primarily in countries with controlled economies, right? The government sets the farm gate price, right? And if I'm in Nigeria, I can check what the market price on every given day is, and I can charge something which is closer to the market price, right? Right? And so we need to be careful, Mark, to understand that Cote d'Ivoire and Ghana do not represent, when they talk about the connectedness of the market price and the farm gate price. I mean, they're really talking about Cote d'Ivoire and Ghana. They're not talking about the rest of the world, because the farm gate price in other parts of the world is much more closely connected to the market price than it is in Cote d'Ivoire. Tony's model doesn't work outside of Cote d'Ivoire and Ghana. It cannot scale its model outside of countries where where the government sets the price. Right? It relies on the fact that the government is setting the price to be able to say the things that it is saying. Just sorry, right? Not sorry, not sorry. That's the way it goes. So let's go take a look at this. So this is it's a lot of data. It's interesting to know about it. It's why it's part of Tony's open chain sourcing report. There's no indication of, oh, how much of this cocoa are we sourcing? There are no numbers, right? There are no, other than the roll-up numbers, other than the totals, we don't have any numbers that we can look at to roll up to the totals. And so this is, again, baffling with BS, because they're not dazzling us with our brilliance. Another really quickly, I've only got a couple more pages here in the report. Page 17. Responsibly sourced volume is the key driver for change, which I completely and totally disagree with. Responsibly sourced volume is not the key driver for change, right? The key driver for change is for the big companies, big chocolate, right? And I will include Tony's in big chocolate now. They generate over 200 million in revenue. Their manufacturing is done for them in part by Barry Callebaut. Their partners use Callebaut, Semois, Barony, and a couple of other companies to do their processing for them, right? But the key driver for change is all of big chocolate to accept responsibility for the fact that they've had zero systemic investment in cocoa farms and cocoa farmers over the last 50 years, and to realize that if they want to continue, they're going to need to invest tens of millions of dollars, hundreds of millions of dollars over the course of the next 5 to 10 years, right, in order to redress all of the things that they have ignored for the past 50 years. So it's not the key driver for change. The key driver for change is for big chocolate to accept responsibility for what they're doing and saying, we're gonna pay. We're gonna dig into our pockets, profits, shareholders, all those things, and we're gonna pay to get this stuff done. The only way to make that happen is for people who love chocolate to preferentially start buying specialty chocolate made from small chocolate makers who can trace things to smaller farms, right? And to know what it is that's going on. At that point, big chocolate will say, oh, we need to pay more attention to this because our revenues are being affected by this. And so if we could go from roughly 2%, which is what specialty chocolate consumption is right now, to 10% over the next decade, then we would have signaled to big chocolate that they need to get this done. But big chocolate needs to invest in farms and farming to reduce pressure to deforest. We're looking at productivity. If we can improve productivity and reduce the amount of land to reach the amount of cocoa required for a farmer to reach above the living income reference price, that's the focus. That should be the focus of investment in the farms, producing the same amount or more cocoa on less land. How do we do that? Right? How do we reduce the pressure to deforest? How do we make sure that farmers are earning enough money so that they can send their kids to school? They can make sure that they and their children have access to health care, water security, food security, right? Which all relies on transportation security. I need to be able to get things to and from the market. There are all these kinds of things. Big Chocolate has spent all this time keeping their hands off and saying it's not our responsibility. And they spend all their time producing reports like this to make us think that they're doing all these things that they should be lauded for, right? This is not the driver for change. I totally reject this premise, right? Responsibly sourced volume is the key driver for change. Responsibly sourced volume is not the key driver for change. So, do I see Big Chocolate stepping up and investing at the farm level? And if so, to what extent? Mark, the answer to the question is absolutely not, except unless we as consumers demand that they do. Right? Big Chocolate is going to do everything that they can to protect their profit margins. And they will protect their profit margins at all costs. At all costs. They have shown that they're willing to stay in court for 20 years rather than address the problem. It would have been less expensive, probably, to actually invest in the farm than it would have been to pay the legal costs of some court cases here in the US. I mean, there are all these people, all these companies that are coming up with alternatives to cocoa, whether they're using cell culturing or they're using precision fermentation and other technologies. What they're doing is they're giving Big Chocolate an off ramp, right, so that they can abandon cocoa farmers. Oh, I can produce an ersatz chocolate using precision fermentation and barley with a little bit of carob, and I can source barley and carob in the EU and build a big factory in the EU. And so I don't have to import cocoa beans and worry about the EUDR and stuff like that. Oh my gosh, you give them half an opportunity, they're going to do it. The only way to get Big Chocolate to do any of this is for consumers, right, to put pressure, right, on the big companies by voting with their pocketbooks, by voting and saying, we're not going to buy this stuff anymore. We're not going to give you the opportunity to do it. That's my opinion in terms of how to, I hope that's an answer that's acceptable to you. But that's my feeling about it. I'm just out here saying, here's what's going on. So enabling, I don't know why I talked about this. I have page 18 listed, not entirely sure what I wanted to think about with this. I think I got the wrong page. Oops, not page 1, but let's go to page 26, which is another page that I looked about. Oh, this is another thing that, again, another thing that we need to think about when we're looking at reports from Tony's is, are these to scale? Right? So we don't have a zero line. We don't have a LERP line in here, right? So this 2005, this 2200, are these drawn to scale? Is 46, is the height of this 46, is the height of this in scale to this 2200? I don't think it is. So we need to be very, very, very careful, right? When we look at these things, we need to be very, very careful when we look at these things to understand how we are being manipulated, right? Deliberately manipulated, right? To accept what it is that's going on, right? This is an 86-page report. I'm not even halfway through, right? And do I really care that we're, that what is this 4729, right? So you've got all this data here. Again, what they're doing is they're throwing a lot of spaghetti at the wall. They're throwing a lot of partially cooked pasta at a vertical surface in as many shapes of partially cooked pasta against a variety of vertical surfaces, and hoping that some stuff will stick, right? That some parts of this will resonate with people, right? And we've got all this stuff. I would prefer right? I have to say that I would prefer, even though I understand just how bad this graphic is, right? It's very, very straightforward, right? But with mouse overs, right, taking advantage of what the internet does, right, rather than putting in a static PDF, right, right, with no hypertext links. I mean, the number of hypertext links that take me back and forth within the document, they don't exist, right? In 2025, come on, guys, right? Or whoever is designing their reports, you need to do better, right? You need it. No, if we want to take you seriously, if you want me to take these reports seriously, you need to do a better job. And I am going to be on your butt, Tony's, right, forever, right, until you guys start doing a better job, right, talking about what is your reporting on what it is that you're doing, right? And the future of AI for someone like me is bleak because of the fact that these AIs, right, take the content that they're being presented in transparency reports like this and taking everything as face value, as being true, right? There is no skepticism whatsoever about it because they write in authoritative tones, because um, they write confidently, right? Your first reaction is to take what they say as quote unquote the truth, right? That you can trust, or at least trustworthy, if not the truth. And that's a real challenge. So the more we allow ourselves to be disintermediated, the more we allow an AI agent to distance us from the what is being reported, right? And the less critical, the less skeptical we become, the easier it is going to be for big companies like Tony's. Again, 200 million in sales, that's a lot smaller than the largest company in the world, which is 30 some odd billion in sales annually. The harder it's going to be in order to be able to decode what it is that they're doing and to give us confidence in what it is that they're writing about. And that's the end of it today. I hope this was interesting for people who were listening live or going to be listening to it. Mark, thank you very much for the questions and for being here throughout it. I agree with you that the language models are not very good with numbers, especially worse with numbers in photos. You'd think they would have been able to figure out how to decode numbers from PDFs in these days, because even in the PDFs, there is often a there's often something in the PDF that says, "Oh, here's an actual number, not a picture of a number," or "Here's a numeral that we can decode." So they do need to get better at that, and at least acknowledge the limitations. That What incentive do the farmers have that are not getting the living income? Another great question. If I am living in Cote d'Ivoire and Ghana, I, you know, I have no alternative but to sell my cocoa at the farm gate price. No alternative. If I can join a cooperative, um, I may be able to get some addition to whatever the farm gate price is, but that depends upon the management of the cooperative, how the money is distributed back. So that's another challenge to consider. Um, and that big chocolate is never going to step up unless we, the consumers, force them to step up. The EU has been trying to do this at a governmental level, and to some extent, things like the EUDR, the deforestation regulations, the Corporate Sustainable Due Diligence Directive, the Corporate Sustainability Research Reporting Directive. These are designed to force large companies to do more reporting. But as we can see, what they report, well, what we may be able to see, and I hope people will be able to see, is what these big companies report to the EU may not be what they report publicly, right? So in their annual reports. So just a quick note on that. So that's it for today. We've gone over. I'm going to do a future episode looking at uncommon cacao's reports. So I downloaded the 2023 report this morning. I've got the entire archive. I am collecting an archive of traceability and transparency reports. So if you have one that you know of, drop a link to it in the comments to today's post. So if we go down to the bottom, there is a place where you can, if you're a member of the Chocolate Life, you can put a comment in, and that would include a link to a page where I can download traceability reports. So please, this episode of Pod Safe Chocolate, like every episode, is sponsored by the members of the Chocolate Life. And you can go click on the join button at the top of their page. There's always a free membership. There has since 2018. I produce all this content, and all of this content is supported by members of the Chocolate Life and is published at no charge freely to the entire world to be able to look at and comment, respond, and use, remix. There are no, I don't put any limitations on any of that kind of stuff. I want you to share. Of course, I'd like you to link back to me and let me know what you think. But that's it for today. I was excited to go about doing this. I think it's important. I hope you think it's important too. And even though it's a really, really serious topic, and I think that it, absolutely does need to get done, I hope you understand that I enjoy this kind of stuff. I like the intellectual challenge, right? I look forward to the intellectual challenge of looking through these reports and understanding what they're telling us and what they're not telling us, and what we can learn by comparing reports from one year to another year, or one company to another company, and with the express goal of how do we make the world a better place for cocoa farmers, right? And I'm having fun. I hope you're having fun, because remember, if you're working with chocolate and you're not having fun, you're doing it wrong. Until the next time, everybody, ciao.